There are things that should never be touched, secrets best left buried in the dark. But, like all mysterious tales, curiosity often paves the way for grave mistakes. It was a stormy night when my family and I decided to rent an old wooden house deep in the woods, a place where strange stories always lingered. Little did we know that this very house held a dark past, one that those who lived here before had tried desperately to bury. As the dim lights flickered on, the creaking sounds of ancient doors echoed, and a chill settled around us. I suddenly realized that something was amiss. Eerie images danced in my mind. Whispers filled the air, and a shadowy figure loomed in every dark corner, as if watching our every move. Would you dare to step into this place where every secret could become a reality? Tread carefully, for what lurks in the shadows may be far scarier than you can imagine. Good evening, everyone, and welcome. Staying in remote places can be a pretty creepy experience, especially when you're in a small wooden cabin. It may not provide much protection, right? So for now, get comfortable and let the darkness take control. About a year ago, I got a puppy, an Alaskan Malamute. I was thrilled to have a dog. I envisioned hiking, camping, and traveling together. It was fall in Iowa, and camping can get pretty cold, so I decided to look for cabin rentals. I found an amazing cabin on Airbnb in Wisconsin. It was secluded in the middle of the woods and came fully loaded with a hot tub, internet, pool table, and a great kitchen. The cabin was stunning and surprisingly cheap to rent. The first time I visited the cabin, I had a fantastic time. It was just me and my dog. We relaxed, hiked. I cooked a delicious dinner, and I slept well. I only stayed one night to escape from my hectic work schedule. After returning home, I told my friend, Lucy, about the cabin, and she was eager to join me for a trip. We decided to go the night before Halloween. It was just Lucy, my dog, and me. That night was a blast. We cooked dinner, enjoyed the hot tub, and settled in to watch scary movies. By that point, I was pretty drunk and standing in the kitchen when I could have sworn I saw Lucy running down the basement stairs, which were right next to where I stood. I glanced over at the living room, and there was Lucy, sitting on the couch, engrossed in the movie. I was freaked out, but, being drunk, I brushed it off. We ended up passing out late, and nothing else strange happened. Until the next morning. That's when I became a firm believer in the paranormal. I had always been somewhat skeptical about ghosts. I'd had weird experiences before, but could always explain them away. However, that morning, we were both hungover. After a light breakfast, we decided to soak in the hot tub. I decided to lock my dog in his crate, and Lucy and I went outside to enjoy the hot tub. It felt magical because it was Halloween, and snow was falling heavily around us. We sat in the hot tub for about 15 minutes when I heard a loud bang coming from inside the cabin, and my dog started barking at something. We rushed back inside to the kitchen, eager to escape the cold, and froze in our tracks. The entire kitchen was in shambles. All the cabinets were flung open, the refrigerator and top freezer doors stood wide, bar stools were tipped over, drawers were yanked out, and pots and pans were scattered across the floor. Lucy's phone, which had been charging on the counter, lay unplugged and on the ground. I had no other explanation for this chaos than something paranormal. My dog looked terrified, but there was no way he could have caused this. He was still a puppy and hadn't grown that big yet. Besides, he had been locked in his crate before we went outside. The kitchen had been a bit messy from our night of fun, but nothing like the disaster we walked into. I knew Lucy hadn't done it because we had both stepped outside at the same time. There was also no way someone could have broken in. We were in the middle of nowhere, and with the heavy snowfall, we would have heard any footsteps. The hot tub was right next to the long driveway leading to the cabin, so we would have seen anyone drive up. I had no explanation for how this had happened, so now I was a believer, and so was Lucy. I'm sure my dog witnessed something strange. We left soon after that incident. Believe it or not, I returned to that cabin multiple times after this experience, and nothing unusual happened since. Maybe Halloween stirred up the spirits, and they wanted to be seen or heard in some way. Perhaps I really did see a ghost the night before. Who knows what other strange events might have occurred in that cabin. It's very old and is actually available for booking this summer. It's booked out until the end of September, and it seems to be quite popular. I noticed it's available again on Halloween. Maybe I should go back. I lived in an old mountain cabin from the age of 6 until shortly before my 15th birthday, which means I spent most of my childhood there with my mom and stepdad. We always had pets, and for most of the time I lived there, we had a Rottweiler named Max. He played a significant role in the events that unfolded. Things started happening around the time we moved in. The cabin was built into the side of an incline, so there was a sort of bridge from the back of the top floor that led outside. This bridge connected to what was my first bedroom there, featuring a small balcony and a sliding glass door that lacked a curtain. At night, it revealed an incredibly dark scene outside that would terrify any kid my age. Eventually, a few years later, my mom reorganized the house and moved me to the downstairs bedroom. It was warmer being closer to the fireplace, and this move was a birthday present from my parents. This became my room for most of my time living there, including the period when my family brought Max into our lives. Max, my parents would occasionally leave me alone at home while they went shopping or ran errands, leaving me by myself until around 8 or 9 p.m. At first, I didn't mind this, but soon I began to experience things that made me afraid to be alone. I would hear both a male and female voice calling or whispering my name, knocking sounds, rustling noises, and footsteps. Max would often growl or bark at nothing, which only heightened my anxiety. It's important to note that we lived in a small mountain town, so there weren't many cars or pedestrians passing by, especially after dark. I started keeping Max close, feeling safer with him by my side. Eventually, my mom moved me back upstairs, this time to the front room, which had its own small balcony. Around this time, when I was 12 or 13, the activity intensified dramatically. I remember sitting in my room one evening at sunset, reading a book of ghost stories, a book that I still own, and suddenly hearing a man call my name loudly. Startled, I went downstairs to ask my parents if they had called for me, but they said they hadn't. I told my mom about it, but she couldn't explain it either. During the summer, I would often camp outside near our house by myself. I recall one night when I brought my Nintendo DS out with me to my campsite. After playing late into the night and leaving my lantern on, I fell asleep with my sleeping bag only pulled up to my waist. Just before I drifted off, I felt a warm wind blow through my tent. When I woke up the next morning, I was completely tucked in, as if my mom had come to check on me. However, she denied having done so, and she likely went to bed before I did. My lantern was off, and at first, I thought I had left it on until the bulb burned out. But when I checked, I was able to turn it on just fine. In my new upstairs room, whenever I came down the stairs, I had a clear view down the hall to the sliding glass door I mentioned earlier. Usually, nothing significant was out there, but I always felt a sense of dread about that area. One night, as my parents called me down for dinner, I was heading down the stairs when I caught a glimpse of a woman in a long black dress pressing her hand against the glass. The most frightening aspect of her was that she had no face. It was just a skull. That evening terrified me to the point that I started having Max sleep in my room with me at night. I could hear whispering and footsteps that sounded like someone pacing and muttering in the living room right beneath my bedroom. My mom told me she heard it too, especially from the downstairs bedroom next to the hallway, leading right to the living room. One night, shortly before I left the house for reasons unrelated to the activity, I had left the curtain covering the glass door that led to my balcony open so I could see the moon and stars. I woke to the sound of Max growling and looked outside to see a transparent figure on the balcony, reminiscent of that famous photograph of the brown lady, but this one was hooded. It looked like the same entity I had seen out the back door. That was my last major encounter before moving out. However, the whispering and footsteps from downstairs persisted for the remainder of my time there. To this day, my mom and I agree that the house was haunted, while my stepdad remains skeptical and denies any supernatural occurrences. I also want to add that shortly after I moved in, I opened the closet in my first upstairs bedroom and found what appeared to be the naked, shuddering form of a woman in the fetal position. This sight terrified me as a 6-year-old, causing me to slam the closet shut and never open it again for the rest of my time there. I lived in Pennsylvania until I was 1 month shy of turning 12. I remember that date well because you had to be 12 to hunt in Pennsylvania, and I was eagerly looking forward to it. When we moved to Florida, I was happy to learn that I could hunt here too. I had a few good friends living right down the street from me, Our home was situated out in the country at 1692 Stanley Road, literally in the middle of nowhere. We often hung out at my buddy's place, and one of our favorite pastimes was hiking up a hill for about half a mile until we reached a berm pile and a basic cabin at the top. The cabin had an outhouse, no lights, and nothing else. We used it as a fort for Nerf battles, manhunt, and capture the flag. One night, my friend invited a few of his other friends and cousins up to the cabin so we could roast marshmallows and play manhunt. There were about 13 of us to start, but the numbers dwindled to 10 by nightfall. We played manhunt, 5 on 5, in the dark. Around 11 p.m., we were in the middle of a game when two of my friends decided to hang back with me, as we were the fastest runners. We realized that there were only 3 of us left on our team and that we hadn't captured anyone from theirs. We tried to make a jailbreak and lost my friend, Francis, in the process. It was just Lewis and me, about 100 yards away from the other team, who had 3 of our 5 players in their jail. They began to press our sides, trying to mess with us until one of them accused us of cheating. Lewis and I exchanged confused glances, unable to figure out why they thought we were cheating. Our side had about a quarter of the field heavily covered in trees, while the other side was. Same with both wooded areas near the back of the sides. At one point when we were chasing someone off our side, I saw Jake and I running in the same direction, along with someone on the other side of Jake. I quickly cut behind him, intending to surprise the other person and nab them on our side since I was probably the fastest one there and didn't want to be on the team that captured no one. Once I emerged from behind Jake's trajectory, we were both running, and I saw absolutely no one. Nothing, no trees, no scarecrows, absolutely nothing that I could have mistaken for a person. I surmised that someone from the other team must have been hiding behind our lines, waiting for us to cross over so they could tag us. The game eventually dwindled down to just the 2 of us left against the other side, which had 4 players. We managed to cap one person, but then everyone was exhausted. I asked the other team, mostly Jake's cousin, who had been behind the line waiting to tag us, but no one claimed responsibility. I figured it was someone just trying to mess with us. Back at the cabin, we started cooking hot dogs and marshmallows over the fire. There were about 10 to 13 of us, with one person being around 15 years old, that being the older cousin. We were all drinking soda and not beer. Note that if this had been beer and I'd been older, I would have just chalked this part up to the influence of booze. All 10 of us were gathered around the fire when we noticed someone coming up the hill. It's hard to see outside in the dark after you've been staring at a fire for a while, but at least 4 of us spotted this person. So we figured it was one of the people who had left coming back or perhaps someone new. After about half an hour, no one arrived. We went to look but found no one. Being the intelligent young kids we were, we decided to investigate further. It was summer, after midnight, and we were all out playing with fire and flashlights, looking for a mystery person. Definitely not honor students. We took the path that led down the hill and could clearly see my friend's house in the distance. They had left the outside light on for the dogs, but there was no one in between. Someone was clearly trying to mess with the group. So, they ran into the woods and came out directly on top of us, scaring the life out of everyone. After we all changed our pants and regrouped, we headed back to the cabin, only to see someone on the very far side of the clearing. There were 3 of us with flashlights, and we all attempted to illuminate the figure, but we were too far away to get a good look. As soon as we lit them up, she or he vanished into the woods. Okay then, a few of us were freaking out. 6 people decided to head down to my friend's house to spend the night. Rest of the night, where the axe murderer from hell wouldn't be able to get them since they had 6 people, while the 4 of us who decided to rough it were just that, 4. The larger group took the flashlights, leaving me with the only one left. We decided to figure out who this mysterious figure was. Lewis had an uncle who was only 10 years older than him, so we figured it might just be him messing with us. We knew his place was less than a mile from where we were, as there was a large extended family that owned much of this land. Lewis, Francis, and one of Lewis's cousins, Charlie, along with myself, began to walk across the clearing. Once we were about 40 feet from the edge of the woods, we could hear someone moving around in the bushes, not stomping or anything, but very carefully navigating through the fallen sticks and underbrush, trying to make as little noise as possible. We assumed it was Uncle Josh, so we split up again. Francis and Charlie waited in the clearing while Lewis and I ventured into the woods to try and flush him out. We figured Francis and Charlie could see okay into the clearing, and to be honest, they actually could. Eventually, Lewis and I found ourselves about 50 feet into the woods, further than we thought we needed to go, when we heard this low rumbling noise. In that moment, I regretted acting so impulsively. Lewis and I looked at each other to make sure it was neither of us making the noise, and we basically stopped dead in our tracks. I shined the flashlight in the direction of the sound, which was directly away from the clearing and the fire, but couldn't see anything. There was nothing there. To this day, it remains one of the eeriest noises I've ever heard, like something a Halloween decoration would make, but real. We stayed 50 feet into the woods, never venturing much further, and searched the general area but never found anything. After a half hour, now past 2 a.m., we heard a noise just at the edge of the clearing. Both of us turned around, expecting it to be Francis and Charlie coming to figure out what the hell was taking us so long. Instead, I saw one person standing there, hiding halfway behind a tree, staring at us. I had never wanted so badly to avoid shining my flashlight on something before that moment. If it was dark, I wanted to see what it was, but from a distance, well past that shadowy figure, I could see Francis and Charlie milling around the fire. I had this awful feeling that there was no way Uncle Josh could be this creepy. I didn't want to see who it was, and all I wanted was to get away from there. The hair on the back of my neck stood on end. Lewis must have seen it too, because he slowly began backing further into the woods. We moved in a wide circle around this shadowy person and managed to make it back to the clearing. Once we reached the cabin, we grabbed Francis and Charlie and began making our way back to Lewis's place. When we were about 100 yards from the cabin, we heard its door slam, and we bolted. When we made it back to Lewis's house at the bottom of the hill, we debated what to do. Should we call 911? Was it a trespasser? Or was it simply a family member messing with Lewis? We went to notify Lewis's parents, who we figured would be overjoyed at the thought of being woken at 3 a.m. by a bunch of sweaty, terrified 11-year-olds. They weren't home. Apparently, Lewis's grandfather had a heart attack around 10 p.m., and none of us had cell phones. This was 1998, after all. The only person who had been notified was Lewis's 19-year-old step-cousin, who had drunk himself nearly into blackout as soon as the adults left him in charge of the younger kids. He got a serious talking to the next day from basically every adult in attendance. That meant Uncle Josh and basically every other member of Lewis's family who could have been messing with us were all at the local hospital, attending to the patriarch of the family who had suffered a mild coronary at 4 a.m. We knew sleep wasn't an option and began to watch and wait for the shadow guy to show up at the bottom of the hill. Less than 10 minutes later, I heard a sound coming from upstairs. The only problem was that there was no one upstairs. Upstairs in Lewis's house, there was something, or someone, on the roof. Lewis grabbed a pellet gun because, that was going to be super effective, and we went outside because we considered ourselves pretty smart. We shined every flashlight straight up at the roof, and then we saw a completely black silhouette jump off the far side of the house in a mad sprint. The part of the roof it jumped from was over 25 feet high, and with the huge vaulted ceiling in the back room, the roof was even taller to accommodate the attic. We watched it run down the hill and toward the creek, which was about 10 feet wide and maybe 2 feet deep. We followed it until we realized how much faster it was than us. Once it reached the edge of the creek, it stopped and looked back at us. Then, with that rumbling noise, it jumped the creek, and just like that, we lost it. The next day, we told Lewis's parents what had happened, and they informed us that the cabin was being torn down. A cow had been killed and dismembered in the cabin earlier that morning, presumably after we left. It could have been a panther, as cows weren't uncommon in that part of the property, but usually tended to avoid people. It could have been a bear, but hell, we never went back up that hill at night. We never saw that thing again. It might not seem like much, but to 11-year-old me, I had a new face for fear. A group of friends was staying at this remote cabin owned by one of my friend's cousins. There were no roads leading to the cabin, and it was a good 3 to 4 day hike from where you parked the cars. I couldn't go at the same time as everyone else due to work obligations, so I decided to head up the same day but later. That meant I would have to camp for a night by myself. The latter part of this trail was too dangerous to navigate at night, especially for someone who didn't know it, but I didn't care. I was kind of looking forward to it. I had never camped alone before. I found myself in the middle of the woods when the sun went down. I set up my camp in a small clearing that was probably 40 feet across, got my campfire going, and pitched my small one-person tent. I did all the camping stuff, cooking hot dogs on sticks over the fire and making s'mores. I probably stayed up for a good 2 or 3 hours after dark. It was mid-autumn, so the days were somewhat short. The entire time, I thought I heard something moving in the woods at the edge of the clearing. At first, I didn't think anything of it because the woods are full of animals. However, as the night went on, I realized that whatever it was just circling the clearing over and over. Once I started paying attention, it made 4 or 5 laps around before I decided to get up and investigate. The noise stopped as soon as I stood up, and I thought I heard something moving away through the woods. I shrugged it off, thinking it was probably just a curious fox that got scared when I stood up. I decided it was time to sleep, so I doused the fire and climbed into my tent. I began to doze off, slipping into that half-asleep state for a while. I normally hear weird sounds when I'm in this state, so I didn't think much of it when I heard a voice. But then something woke me all the way up, and I realized it was real and just outside my tent. It was just above a whisper, and I wasn't sure if it was in another language, or if they were speaking English in a way that I didn't understand. I lay there for what felt like a long time, listening and waiting for something to happen. There was just enough moonlight to light up the walls of the tent, and then I saw a hand press into the wall of my tent down near my foot. That completely freaked me out. I sat up quickly, and whoever was outside bolted away, running full sprint through the woods. I scrambled out of the tent and shined my flashlight around, but I saw nothing. I was half expecting to find a bloody handprint on the tent, but no, I didn't sleep that night. I packed up camp at first light in the morning and made a beeline for the cabin. I used to be a scout leader, and each year we would go during the New Year period to a camping site. Being in Canada, New Year weather is pretty damn cold, think minus 30 to 40 degrees Celsius, so the camping is done in lodges. The lodge we slept in had no toilets, so each night before we went to bed, I would round up my scouts and walk them to the bathroom, which happened to be in another lodge about a minute's walk away. That year, I happened to have 2 really immature kids who took too long to get ready, so I sent my scouts to the washroom and told them I'd catch up once the 2 guys stopped mucking around. A few minutes later, I was on my way. By then, most of the children had already brushed their teeth and used the toilet. When I finally entered the lodge, I could see that most of them had congregated around the vending machine in the hallway across from the toilet. I entered the bathroom with the 2 kids who were with me and checked to see if anyone was in the stalls. Is anyone in the toilet? I recognized the voice of Jay, one of my scouts. After that, I proceeded to brush my teeth. A few minutes later, I asked again, "Everything good?" "Yeah," came the reply. This time, I recognized the voice of another kid, Walter. At that moment, I thought nothing of it and assumed I had just misheard the voice the first time around. A few more minutes passed, and even the 2 difficult kids I was with had finished prepping themselves. I asked if everything was good again, but got nothing back. So, I told the 2 kids to start opening the stalls to see if something had happened to Walter. There were about 8 stalls, and they were all empty. The 2 kids started freaking out because they also heard the voices, and since they had been using the sink right by the door, there was no way for someone to pass them without being noticed. I sent them to check the shower stalls, but once again, no one was there. The 2 kids were now becoming really agitated, so I decided it was time to regroup in the hallway and head back. In the hallway, I saw both of the kids we thought we heard, who denied having entered the washroom after I came in. To this day, my scout squadron refers to this incident as the poop monster incident. My family, along with 4 others, owns a hunting cabin deep in the woods of Pennsylvania. When hunting season is out, the cabin becomes a vacation spot for everyone. Spot for these families. We would often all end up there during the 4th of July weekend. One year, my parents decided to take me, my uncle, who was 3 years older than me, and my 2 childhood friends up to the cabin for Easter. My parents decided to go out to the bar for a bit and leave us kids at the cabin alone. The youngest of us was 7 at the time, and the oldest was 14. It was cold, and there were 8 inches of snow on the ground. The sun had started to set, and the 4 of us had gathered around the table in front of the wood stove, playing Uno. We had several battery-operated lamps set about in the cabin, as well as two outside to light the walkway for my parents when they came back. Just as we were finishing a game and getting ready to take the 30-yard walk to the outhouse, we started to hear the snow below the window crunch. Being kids, we all felt a bit uncomfortable, but we reminded ourselves that we were in nature and it was probably just a deer. After some coaxing, my uncle finally agreed to peek out the window. He said he saw nothing. As soon as he sat back down, we started to hear a low grunt and a heavy creaking sound on the front porch. Before my parents left, they had given my uncle the keys to the gun cabinets and a rundown on which gun to use if there was trouble. So, like any good protector, he armed himself. We then heard heavy breaths and what sounded like heavy paws on the porch. Those heavy paws then started to crash repeatedly into the front door. All four of us ran upstairs and locked the wooden door, as if it would provide any real protection from the 400-pound black bear that was trying to break in. About 10 minutes went by, and we finally heard the front door give way. The bear was in the cabin with us. It rummaged through the downstairs for what felt like an eternity. As a small, frightened child, it seemed to last forever until it finally left. Thankfully, it never attempted to come upstairs after us. When my parents returned, they were relieved that we were all right, and they never left us alone that long again. Last year, I vacationed in the Blue Ridge Mountains of Georgia. It was a wonderful trip, save for a few things. You'd need to understand the area where. I stayed at a large cabin close to McKaysville, but not really in any town. There were cabins nearby, however, the closest was about 150 yards away, with one about twice as far on the other side. This distance was filled with dense trees, steep inclines, rivers, and streams. This is the front door and deck area of the cabin. Moving to the right of the previous perspective, this is the side of the cabin. Something to note is that the two windows there were the windows of my bedroom, and it was possible to just stand outside. Honestly, nothing happened in relation to those windows, but with everything else that occurred, I was on edge because of their placement. Finally, we have the back deck. As you saw, the house sat at an incline. Walking in through the front door and down through the basement would bring you to the backyard. Upon walking through the front door, you would see the living room to your left, and to your right was my room and the basement door, sitting not 8 inches apart. The living room is connected to the kitchen and dining area, with the upstairs having my parents' room, a bathroom, and a locked door. As I mentioned, some of the decorations were a little bit odd. With this being the first painting in the living room, this is a picture that sits upstairs, and here's a broken picture in the basement, along with 2 locked doors, which is not uncommon in an Airbnb. However, they didn't have a lock like a bathroom or bedroom door. They had a different kind. Could completely turn the knob, and the door wouldn't open. It wouldn't even rattle between the sides of the lock when pushing or pulling. The door had no give. It had to have been bolted from the inside, which makes me wonder how it was opened. Being the blubbering fool that I am, I didn't take pictures of them. I just figured it was storage. Now, to the meat of the story. We arrived on the 19th, and my birthday was on the 23rd. The night of the 22nd at 11:35 p.m. is the time in question. I was staying up with some close friends until midnight, so we could be there as I turned 16. They had already turned 16 earlier that month or prior because a lot of us were born in July. We were in a Discord call, watching Nikocado Avocado eat an exorbitant amount of food, laughing at his gluttony-fueled breakdown because he's a clown. My dog was asleep on my bed, but began scratching at the door because she had to use the restroom. Something to understand about her is that she's big but has the energy of a small dog at times. She is a 90-pound pit bull and was on edge entering the cabin, which is very uncommon for her. In any other situation, I would describe her as just happy to be there, but this time was different. I had to take her around the perimeter of the cabin multiple times before she would come inside, and even then, she'd just walk into her cage that we had brought with us for her while we were in town. Rarely would she go in there unless told to, but she almost ran to it. I told my friends I would be right back because Blue had to use the restroom. To bring her outside, I had to go down through the basement and out the backyard, where a very long tether was spiked to the ground. I was standing just inside the door and flipped the lights on. I reached to grab Blue's collar, but she wasn't there where she just was. I looked over, and she was staring out the window into the backyard. She's honestly the goofiest dog. so I figured she must have seen a bug. I opened the door, grabbed her collar, and tried to pull her outside, but she wouldn't go. She's big enough that I can't make her move if she doesn't want to, and it took some convincing. But even when she was outside, she didn't take her eyes off the other side of the backyard, which I couldn't see. It was too dark, even with the porch light, which only illuminated about 10 feet in front of me at best. The end of the backyard was about 30 feet in front of me, and I was starting to grow nervous because she usually doesn't act like this. So, I attached her to my tether and kept her close. After about 10 seconds, she started to pee but kept her eyes locked on where they had been. Then I heard the most unnatural noise coming from the other side of the yard. I need you to understand that, at its core, it sounded like a person. If it had sounded like an animal, I wouldn't have been so afraid, but it sounded like a person badly mimicking the noise a frog makes. It was loud. Had to have been, because southern bugs never stopped wailing. The bugs and other wildlife were very loud for me to have heard this noise as clearly as I did. That noise must have been yelled. Blue, who has never done this and has no aggressive bone in her body, started growling very aggressively. She still wanted to go inside, and after I unhooked her, she started backing up, showing her teeth and frothing at the mouth while growling. As we backed up, I heard it again, more to the left on the trail with wooden logs on either side. I pulled her inside, and she took no time darting back up the basement stairs and into my room. I slammed the door and made sure to lock it, then went back up the stairs and specifically remember locking the door at the top as well. It can only be unlocked from the main part of the house where I was, and I swear this to all that is holy. As I locked the door quickly, we all agreed that it was really weird, and I should look over there when I woke up in the morning. I didn't sleep until 2 or 3 a.m. At 7, my alarm went off, and I woke up to find the basement door wide open. My sisters were asleep down there because it had a bedroom. They couldn't have opened it. It can only be unlocked from the other part of the house. My mother and stepfather weren't even awake yet. The door was opened abnormally wide, swung all the way around so it was hitting the wall behind it. After checking, the door from the basement to outside was unlocked as well but not opened. I haven't the slightest idea how this could have happened. These doors can only be unlocked from the opposite side. The following day was my birthday, and it went all right. The night of the 23rd, we were packing up because we were leaving early on the morning of the 24th. It was between 9 to 10 p.m., and I had to retrieve the spike and tether from the backyard in order to finish packing. I psyched myself up, grabbed a light, and power walked over. I pulled it out of the ground and quickly walked back up to the house. Around the time I reached the porch, I heard the noise again, this time immediately to my right and extremely loud. The bugs were constantly producing the most deafening buzzing noises, making it difficult to have a conversation even a little bit apart. It was the same very human-like noise. The best description I could come up with was a human very badly mimicking the sound of a frog or toad. This is where I was standing. This is similar to the picture from the backyard facing the house, but over 20 feet. You can see where I was near the door and where it had to have been. For a moment, I thought about going over there to see what it was and finally answering the question I had been asking myself, but I valued my life too much. So, I ran inside, slammed the door, and drew the blinds. Truthfully, I didn't sleep at all that night. I stayed awake listening for the noise again and pretended to wake up the next morning. I've been searching online for whatever may have been responsible, but I can't find any logical answers. If anyone has any idea of what could have made that noise, I would love it if you could get in touch. A few years ago, my friends and I went on a trip to a secluded cabin in the mountains. We were there for the entire weekend and had a blast. However, around midnight on a Friday, we heard a blood-curdling scream and a loud crashing noise coming from outside. We thought nothing of it at first, but the screams continued. So, we decided to investigate. What we found was something that no rational mind could ever have imagined in a billion years. We found ourselves staring at a bizarre creature, which we can only describe as a cross between a goblin, a demon, and something completely unnatural. It had no eyes, only hollow black sockets that gave it a completely hollow stare. This thing was covered in a thin sheen of dripping blood, which glistened in the moonlight. It was busy hacking apart what appeared to be the lower half of a girl. It had already made a pretty good job of it. When it noticed us, It let out a bestial roar. My best friend screamed and fainted. The other friend ran and hid, and I froze in fear. We never told anyone about this. Not our parents or friends, no one. Even now, after years, I get nervous whenever I have an encounter in the woods after midnight. We got out of there as soon as we could. No way we were going to stick around for nature's oddest work of art. The murderer was long gone, thank God. I do hope that you found this story as chilling as I did. The woods can hide many secrets, some far darker than we can imagine. So, next time you find yourself in a secluded cabin, remember to keep your eyes and ears open. You never know what might be lurking just beyond the trees. If you enjoyed this tale, please don't forget to like, share, and comment your thoughts below. We'd love to hear your experiences or any theories you have about what we encountered that night. And make sure to subscribe to our channel to stay updated with more spine-tingling stories. Until next time, stay safe and keep the lights on.